As of today, the Department of Justice says 443 people have been charged in D.C. federal court related to crimes committed at the U.S. Capitol. And the court filings are providing a clearer picture of the type of people who tried to overthrow the government that day. Like Ryan Samsel of Pennsylvania, who was arrested on January 30th, charged with, among other things, forcibly assaulting a federal agent. Prosecutors say Samsel, here in the light blue jacket, was one of the very first Trump supporters to approach a police barricade surrounding the Capitol while Trump was still speaking. They say in the process of pushing the barricades to the ground, Samsel and others knocked over a U.S. Capitol police officer, causing the officer's head to hit the stairs behind her, resulting in a loss of consciousness. That is her there on the ground. She later blacked out and collapsed and had to be transported to the emergency room. Samsel has been in jail since his arrest, and today prosecutors filed a motion to keep him there until his trial. Part of that is based on an extensive history of violence. In 2009, Samsel was convicted of assaulting a woman and choking her to the point of unconsciousness. In 2011, a conviction for choking and beating his pregnant girlfriend. In 2019, yet another victim recounted several incidents where he broke into her house and assaulted her. She also alleged Samsel raped her multiple times. So that's just one example of some of the people that Republicans in Congress do not want to investigate. Because even though that day is over, that person is now in jail, the slow motion insurrection is ongoing. This weekend, a superseding indictment against a far-right militia group called the Oath Keepers was unsealed. That revealed communications where one member of the group said, "We want Trump to declare an insurrection and to call us up as the militia." This weekend, Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, suggested a military coup should happen in the United States. Now, political reporter Hunter Walker reports that just over a month ago, Donald Trump met with a tech CEO who helped organize Patriot Caravans from around the country to the protests at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. It's not really over to those who overran the Capitol or their supporters. They're regathering. Hunter Walker wrote that story about Donald Trump, the Patriot Caravans organizer. He writes the morning politics newsletter, The Uprising, which I'm a subscriber to and is very good, and he joins me now. Hunter, tell us about this guy.
So this guy his name is Jeff Brain. That is his real name. He's no stranger to political activism. In the 90s and early 2000s, the LA Times has reported he was part of this effort to have the San Fernando Valley secede from the city of Los Angeles. More recently, in 2018, he launched this website, Clout Hub, and he's explicitly framed it as a social media network, for people who are concerned about, quote, censorship. And what that means in practice, some of the most popular forums on the site are all about QAnon. And in the lead up to January 6th, there were these Patriot Caravans groups where people were planning travel, including renting charter buses to go to the Capitol protests. And most importantly, Jeff Brain was personally participating in the main Patriot Caravans for 45 group. He had a message pinned at the top of it. He was encouraging people to plan to go to the Capitol. And also, this Clout Hub Caravan group was featured on the website of the Wild Protest, which is the rally that day that was run by Ali Alexander of the quote-unquote Stop the Steal movement. And that's the rally that occurred in tandem with Trump's rally on the Mall, where they explicitly drew people to the north steps of the Capitol. And on Jeff Brain's site, Clout Hub, there was a picture of Trump supporters, and this obviously ran before the protest actually occurred, a picture of Trump supporters sort of en masse in front of the Capitol dome. It eerily prefigured what happened that day.
A few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal was reporting on Trump's continued ban from many of the major social media platforms and his itchiness to get out of that. Donald Trump, sidelined by Twitter Inc. and Facebook Inc. have been talking with numerous platforms as he seeks a new online megaphone. Jeff Brain, the chief executive of Clout Hub, a fledgling social media network that's become popular with conservatives, thinks his company fits the bill. I imagine we don't know exactly what he was doing down in Mar-a-Lago, but that seems a possibility.
Yeah, so the Wall Street Journal reported that he was there and had a brief chat with Trump about the president potentially going over to Clout Hub. According to my source, who provided me this photo, he was there at Mar-a-Lago seeking funding for his site. And I think that's quite notable because, Mar-a-Lago is a private club. And generally, to get in there, you need to know a member or be a member yourself. The president and his team have not responded to me, about how Jeff Brain ended up there or what he and the president talked about or how long they spent together. But I can tell you, I've been, we can get a glimpse of President Trump's post-presidential life through Instagram. And I've been watching him every day almost at Mar-a-Lago, and he seems to participate in these events and fundraisers. He is often greeted by cheering supporters, and not everyone who's there gets a picture with the president. So Jeff Brain somehow got in there, got close to the president, and this is in spite of the fact that earlier this year, I reported on these Patriot Caravan groups he ran. So this was a known thing. And I reported on that in conjunction with his speech at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, where he participated in a joint event with Matt Gaetz. So what I find really interesting about this is, in spite of the fact he played a very active role in the organization and planning of the January 6th protests, he's been embraced by Republicans, all the way up to President Trump.
Right. You say despite, I would say because of, right? What's happened is that has become, Steve Bannon has said this clearly, like that's essentially the litmus test, right? That the sort of the kind of the vanguard of delusion of anti-democratic attempt at a putsch that represented by Stop the Steal, like that is essentially the canonical view of a MAGA-controlled party. And so a person like Jeffrey Brain would be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah, I got to say, I still find it stunning. I was there on January 6th that day. It was an attack on this country. It was a literal attack on the seat of government. I've reported on The Uprising. People can read this at theuprising.info, that police records show how many people had guns that day. And yet on Capitol Hill, we've seen people like Paul Gosar and Louis Gohmert repeat these lies that, this was an unarmed protest, that, they were, quote unquote, like tourists, right? And it's wild to me how much the Republican Party has embraced this violent attack on the country, and also, how much the general public, frankly, has moved on from this. Yeah. What was the ribbon color for January 6th, right? What was the slogan? This stunning attack that could have been so much deadlier happened on the country, and we're just not talking about it. And the plotters and people who are enabling them are just moving about in the open. And I can tell you, I don't plan to let go of this story at all.
All right, Hunter Walker, uprising.info. Take a look. Thank you very much.